this session because I already know there's a few people who had let me know that they will not be able to attend the session. So this way we can share the information, the link. These professional development videos, they will be on video. They will not be shared publicly like we do for other things. So if people want to have, if you are a workshop leader or if you know a workshop leader who would like to see this, they have to email me because this is, we want to keep this with just workshop leaders, kind of like a safe space so you can say what you would like to say. So with further ado, without any further ado, Mina, please take it away.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. I hope that you're all well and staying safe and healthy. I am going to start by sharing my screen so that you can see my presentation. Can everybody see? Yeah, perfect. Okay. Okay. Oh, hello. All right. Technical difficulties aside. So the purpose for us being together today is really to start discussing this idea of stereotype threat, what stereotype threat is and how we inadvertently often trigger stereotype threat in our classroom, and also how we can combat doing that and helping all of our students get equal access to curriculum, because ultimately equity is about that, helping our students get access, equal access to our curriculum. So my name is Mina Bagdev. I'm also known out there officially as Raksha Bagdev. I teach at Hamilton High School in Chandler, Arizona, honors chemistry and honors research. And this year, for the first time, I'm also teaching some psychology. So that's really like my fun time of my day. So my interest in really trying to close the academic achievement gap, or maybe we should now be calling it closing the opportunity gap that exists for many of our minority students, started about 5 years ago. I was listening to this NPR story, and the story discussed this one study that they did in Chicago, and it was a huge study at a elementary school. So the whole elementary school participated in this. And what they did was they were trying to also close the academic achievement gap. And so the researchers came up with this idea that the reasons that people say the academic achievement gaps exist are things like, well, parents don't have time. Parents of minority students don't have time to help their kids. Parents of minority students don't know how to help their kids. Parents of minority students this, parents of minority students that. So they tried to take all of that under control, and they conducted an experiment where they paid the parents to stay home with their kids, and they offered tutoring to the parents of how to help their kids at home with their homework. So provide a space for students to do the homework, to help them have a quiet space and a quiet time and the routine and all the things that people were saying that these students were not getting. So the financial burden of parents having to find an extra job was relieved, so they were able to stay home, and the ability to help students with homework also increased because the parents themselves were getting taught how to do that. Well, the results showed, really surprisingly, that for Hispanic students, the grades shot up. It really did have an impact. But for African American students, there was very little movement. In fact, there was hardly any movement, not statistically significantly. So then I'm literally listening to this on my way home, driving in the car, and I'm like, I started talking to the radio. It was one of those moments, right? Like, what now? And up to then, I had bought into quite a lot of the rhetoric. You know, the parents don't have time, the parents don't care, the parents this, the parents that. And that really made me question my belief and where I was coming from and my understanding of what's going on here. And so I started researching, and my research led me to this idea of stereotype threat. So that's a little bit about me and how I got into this. And I know that before I joined, we had already done some introductions. Did everyone have a chance to introduce themselves? Does anyone would like to pipe in right now?
We were chatting it up before you got on.
Okay, super. So, the purpose for me today is to help you understand what stereotype is, and also how we can create that safe learning environment where the teacher models how to value and show respect for students and where they're coming from. So what is stereotype threat? Well, before we can say what stereotype threat is, we have to kind of say what stereotype is, right? So a stereotype is any commonly held belief about a group of people, any group of people. So if you could spend a minute, I don't think there's any point us going to breakout rooms, but if you could spend a minute or two just shouting out some stereotypes that you've come across in your classroom. Feel free to unmute and just shout out.
Like stuff that kids say?
Say them all.
Like Black people are good at basketball, or, you know, they're Asian kids are good at math.
Indian kids are harder workers.
Mm-hmm.
Indian people have a what?
Are hard workers.
Are hard workers. Anything else? Okay.
There's stereotypes about poor people. They're poor because, you know, they don't work hard.
They need to pull themselves up by the bootstraps.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, what about athletes?
They're stupid.
Jocks are dumb, right? Girls not good at math, boys not good at reading. I'm going to say the one that's going to make everybody uncomfortable, but Black people just aren't as smart as everybody else. Right? So there's a whole bunch of stereotypes, and we cannot shy away from talking about them, and we cannot shy away from saying what these stereotypes are, because we can't combat them until we acknowledge they exist. So I remember the first time I did this presentation for a group of teachers, my anxiety level was so high just to say that stereotype about Black people not being smart, because it makes us feel uncomfortable to even say the stereotype. And probably in a public forum, even if you're thinking about it, you can probably feel your anxiety levels rising. But unfortunately, these uncomfortable conversations do have to be had, right? So the Hispanic kids, their families don't care. They don't want to work. They don't want to learn. All of those things that we hear every single day in our school environments about every group of kids. So starting with the jocks, going through all the racial stereotyping, going through the gender stereotyping, it all exists in our room, in our rooms with our kids. And the thing is, it's not just the adults that are aware of them, it's the kids as young as 5 years of age that are aware of these things too, as young as 5. So it's really important that we do acknowledge these stereotypes exist so that we can start combating them. So let's start with a little thought experiment to introduce you to this idea of the stereotype threat. So imagine that a stereotype threat exists, that brown-eyed people are ugly to look at. Now, suppose that as a brown-eyed person, I buy into that stereotype threat, and I believe that blue-eyed people are the most beautiful people, while those brown-eyed people are really repulsive to look at. Now, envision that I'm the classroom teacher, and I ask you all to line up and take individual headshots, which I'm going to post on the classroom wall. So we're all going to have our individual headshots taken, and those are going to be blown up across the classroom wall to just recognize everybody in our classroom. So as I get you all lined up, I just approach a blue-eyed student and I say, your eyes look really great with that shirt. Blue eyes are so beautiful. Think about how you would feel if you're a blue-eyed student in that line. Now think about how you're going to feel if you're the brown-eyed student in that line. Discussion? Chime in. What are your thoughts?
I think of Jane Elliott when I hear this, and her, you know, she actually did this in her classroom.
She did?
Yeah, and the kids, you know, the kids felt it.
They felt it. So essentially, if you were a brown-eyed kid in that classroom, you're going to feel fear. What you're actually experiencing is a stereotype threat, right? Even though I didn't say anything about the brown-eyed kids, I didn't say a brown-eyed kid didn't look nice, I didn't say anything. I just pointed out a positive thing about the blue-eyed kids, right? So the threat comes about because if the kid buys into the domain that is into that classroom or into that learning experience, into that subject area, the higher the buy-in into that domain, the greater the stereotype threat they're going to experience. So here I am, I'm about to have my picture taken. I know that brown-eyed people are ugly to look at. I've got brown eyes. I don't want to get into that line, because if my photo comes out ugly, I have just confirmed that stereotype threat, and I have let every brown-eyed person down. That's a lot of pressure. That stereotype threat. So the threat comes in from being aware that the stereotype exists, and I already mentioned that kids as young as 5 years old are aware that these stereotypes exist, especially the racial ones, but also a lot of the gendered ones. They're aware that those stereotypes exist. And if they belong to that stereotyped group and they're aware of that stereotype, and they buy into the domain where they want to be successful, the more they buy in, the higher this threat level becomes. So if we can wrap our heads around that, it's very emotionally charged. It's really very emotionally charged for each and every kid in our classroom, because each and every kid does belong to a group, and each and every kid does know what stereotypes are attached to their group, positive or negative. And sometimes the positive stereotypes are equally damaging, and we'll talk about those later. So because of that emotional charge, a stereotype threat is a very real disruptive psychological state. And that comes about when that student is experiencing, or that person experiences a situation where they feel that they may be in a position where they confirm that negative threat for the group that they belong to. So because of that, it is strongly, strongly associated with social identity. So whether we're talking about race, gender, ethnicity, social class, sexual orientation, whether they're jocks or they're not jocks, whether they're on the chess team or whether they're on the the astronomy club, all of those groups, the students have a social identity in. So the first thing that happens when a student comes under threat of stereotype threat is this idea of hypervigilance. So your brain, as you know, is wired to keep you safe. And it's wired to keep you safe by becoming more vigilant when it experiences a change in the environment that might become a threat. So it's looking for that threat to become a reality. And so now, instead of focusing on what's going on in the classroom, the young ones are now hyper vigilant, and they're focusing on, where is this threat? How am I going to live up to this threat? How am I going to survive this threat? And of course, what that does is it impairs the working memory, because now we've got a release of cortisol. Now we've got a release of stress hormones that are going to shut down cognitive function. So that fear response causes impaired self-regulation, and that is all going to lead to inhibited intellectual performance, because cognitive function essentially shuts down. So Claude Steele was one of the first people to name this phenomena. And so this is just a short YouTube video, which I may cut off because I'm really cognizant of our time together being really short. But just a real quick listen to him, and then we can talk. Maybe you can watch this later on by yourself.
Real Home Realizations by Realtor.com.
My boss recently asked.
A tremendous pleasure to be here, and I have to say, I didn't expect all of this. This is a huge room, and I'm so happy so many of you came out. It's a big affirmation. My best friend in life, where's Dwayne? There he is. Dwayne Fulton came out to see me, so, you know, Chicago is my hometown. So,
Okay, technical glitch there. That's the wrong video. I think I forwarded past it. But essentially, in that video that I wanted to show you, and I'm kind of reluctant, even though it's a short one, is that he's kind of describing what I've just shared with you, that this idea of stereotype threat, and so this book that he's written is called Whistling Vivaldi, and he describes a young Black gentleman at college, who becomes aware that as he is walking to and from campus, he's a big Black man, and people, particularly the females, would cross the street when they saw him coming towards him. And so he started thinking about it, and he realized that if he's walking along and he whistles Vivaldi as he's walking along, the people didn't cross the street as often. And so he's kind of led into this idea of the stereotype of him being this Black man who's very intimidating, very big to look at, and then the women would just rely on that stereotype and get out of his way. And so he started researching the stereotype phenomena, and then that led them to talking about stereotype threat. I will post a link to this in the chat at some point, and we can have you guys watch it at home, because our time's so limited. I want to make sure that we get to talk about stuff. So Dr. Steele suggests that we should try, one of the ways to try and build that sense of community is to build a safe space for our students, or build the sense of identity safety in our classroom. But he talks in the video in very, very generic terms about this idea of building a safe space. But he's really clear about in the video is that we have to put in some effort, and we have to do it actively. So that means we have to be cognizant about all of the subcultures that exist in our classroom. So let's get specific then. Throw out some ideas of how you build identity safe classrooms. What do you do? Just unmute and shout out.
A few years ago, we started doing regular class meetings once a week, and we would, survey students through Google Forms before the class meeting, and then as a grade level team come up with the most common issues and try to craft a way to, have a discussion about that in our class. So I feel like that was a good first step.
So the issues you discussed, just a quick follow-up, the issues you discussed were stereotype related, just other concerns? What kind of things?
Sometimes they were stereotype related. And we also had, social emotional lessons about stereotypes, prejudice, bias. But I do not think that we got as deep as, not even close to as deep as we should have. But those were kind of the starting steps, I guess.
Okay. And did you notice a difference in the culture or the climate in your classroom?
I think that's really hard to tell because it depends on the culture that you create as a teacher. So I think that depending on, I feel like in science, with the norms that we built and the just the general respect for each other that we have, I feel like it carried over pretty well. But if you're in a room where there's a teacher who doesn't follow through with those actions and just has the class meeting and just does the little social emotional lessons but doesn't show that same those same actions as a teacher, I feel like I don't think it made a change on that level.
Okay. Yes. So what you're saying is that the teacher really does play a role in guiding the culture of the classroom based on his or her own actions.
Yeah, especially with, validation, like you were talking about earlier, even positive, positive stereotypes can be damaging as well. So I feel like that resonated with me a lot because I see that a lot in my school where it can be damaging.
Okay. Thank you for sharing. Anybody else? How do you build that safe identity safe classroom?
I can share that I'm in a little bit different environment. I'm teaching at the college level. And the entire community is extremely attuned to those kinds of issues right now. One of the things that I hope I am not doing by responding to a student who says something that's brings up really important point and say, oh, that's a really good question. Let's go ahead and look at some details. And so I want to be validating and supportive, but I'm curious to know if this can lead down some of these avenues you're talking about.
Okay.
I don't know if you guys have heard me say this before, but I talk about identity and race in my classroom. And so I often ask kids to reflect on how they view the world privately, like in their electronic notebook. But then I also invite kids to share. We do a lot of collaborative, actually, almost everything. We do a lot of group work, breakout rooms where kids are having small discussions. And so early on, we try to talk about like how we view the world. Like even if we're looking at data, it's our perspective. And I try to tell kids like your perspective matters and what you bring to the discussion is important because we are all not the same. Like we all see the world differently. So we have to listen to each other and then see if we can maybe hear someone's point of view and does that impact us and maybe make us see the world a little bit differently. And then we talk about like, you know, how sometimes our point of views, maybe they don't like the way that we view the world. Maybe we try to do things and it's not we view the world in a way that it's not necessarily the best thing for everybody, the things, the categories and the things that we've come up with in society. So we talk about that like a lot throughout the entire year. And so I think that kids have, now that I'm in the second semester with my freshmen, I feel like my students are feeling more safe to talk about things and just tell me where their perspectives. And some kids have, because we're having a summit on race coming up next month, and so I've invited some kids to make a video that can be shared with the larger community about identity and race and culture and things like that. And so some of the students are like, yeah, I think I'd like to make a video about, you know, myself and my culture and identity.
Okay. Thank you for sharing. Mitch, did you want to add anything?
Sure. I mean, I guess, you know, I teaching at the college level now, but, you know, and it's a little bit different, especially because it's been remote. But even when, you know, I was in a high school room, I mean, I think that, you know, one of the things that, you know, from sort of that modeling perspective that I always try to take on is, you know, there's sort of, we're this community of learners. We are all, you know, on this journey together. We're all starting at different places, but, you know, we're all going to move to a different place than where we've started from. And so, you know, the idea is that they're, you know, we're all going to advance in some way, shape, or form. And, you know, and we're going to be better when we do it together than, you know, than as individuals. That, you know, that learning isn't you know, a solo sport, that it's something that, you know, best happens when we're able to interchange those ideas and, you know, and try and, you know, from the get-go, just say, you know, that's how this class is going to work. We're going to make mistakes. I'm going to make mistakes. You know, this isn't about answer getting. This is about, you know, making sense of the world.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. Yeah, so each of you has brought something to the table, right? And honestly, I could sit here and give you a checklist, do this, do this, do this, do this. But you and I both know that when you're trying to create culture in your classroom, that culture is really dependent on your personality, what you feel comfortable with, what you feel safe with. I don't know that all of us in this forum, even this small forum, would feel comfortable necessarily throwing out there saying, okay, young ones, let's talk about racial identity. Let's talk about gender identity. And so it really has to do with your comfort level, but engaging kids in those explorations of what it means to identify with a group or even within themselves, how they do identify, and then what that means is really powerful. So often what we find is that stereotype threat will cause people to self-censor, so they won't speak. So encouraging that dialogue by saying, you know, I say this so many times in my classroom, there are no, especially psych, less so in science, but there are no wrong answers. There are no right answers. As long as you can justify what you're saying based on evidence, based on your experience of the world, we can move from that point, right? So creating an identity safe classroom really just means respecting every individual in that room. And when they open their mouth, to really listen to what they say. And I think this is one of the places where modeling really does help us excel at trying to provide those forums in a safe way. And I know a couple of you have said you're teaching at the higher grade levels, at the college level, but honestly, what I'm speaking to even goes to us being employees in a workplace. Because think about the number of times you sat in a staff meeting and self-censored or felt like, I better not say anything because if I do, blah, 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 right? So this carries on throughout every forum of our life. It's not something that we check at the classroom door, coming in or going out. It follows us everywhere. So in this video, again, I'm really cognizant of the time. So I'm going to just explain to you what the video is, and I will put a link to this because it's so fascinating. Pretty much, they do the little game, you know, the little game where you have the pictures in front of you and your opponent has to guess which picture that which person you're looking at. It's like 20 questions. Who am I looking at? So they had a bunch of pictures on the screen and they asked people to play this game. And what they found was that people are really, so half the people were black, half the people were white. Some people were wearing glasses, some people had curly hair, straight hair, all the rest of it. So whereas they could have eliminated half the people by just asking the question, is your person white or is your person black? Nobody asked that question because it's uncomfortable.
Wait, can I ask you a question?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Was it black people that were asking the questions too, or like different, all different color people?
I can't remember the study entirely, but nobody asked it. So I'm thinking,
wow.
I'm thinking it was, I don't want to say. I honestly can't answer that question, but you could look at the study a bit more closely. But what they also did was they found out that there is an age at which people stop asking that question. So they did it with different age groups. And there's an age at which about 7, they stop asking that question, because by then they've got this idea of verbally saying, are you white, are you black, is a bad thing. So we are, as a nation, as a culture, we are censoring ourselves and stopping ourselves talking about race, avoiding talking about stereotypes at a very, very early age. So we're somehow the message is getting there to our kids that this is taboo. We don't talk about it. So that would bring up all kinds of interesting conversations, right? Which I'm going to move on though. So The reason that I bring up that video and this idea of it's taboo is that at some point it became okay to say, I don't see color. I don't see color in my classroom. I just see children. Well, this is a problem because the ethnicity of our kids, the race of our kids has meaning to that kid. And so by saying you don't see the race or the ethnicity, then what you're doing is you're saying you don't see part of that kid. You don't see where that kid is coming from. You don't see their experiences that they bring. You don't see their perspective. You're devaluing anybody who is, and you can insert any stereotype in here, gender blind, color blind, I don't know, athlete blind, whatever stereotype you want to put in there, you're eliminating one large part of who that child identifies as. And why do we do it? That goes back to the previous slide, right? It's taboo. We don't talk about it. If I say, are you black? People are going to think I'm racist. If I say, are you black? Are you white? Are you Asian? People are going to think I'm being racist. I'm not being racist. I'm asking a question which has no value to it. And yet people are still reluctant to ask that question. Thoughts, comments?
Yeah, we had it a couple of years ago. We wanted to look at the database, the AMTA membership, because one of the things that people can fill out is race and with a drop-down menu or something. And I think only 8% of the people had filled it out. So that makes it hard. And I was at a nonprofit conference a couple of years ago, and this was a part of the conversation, and I said, well, if we are an online organization, how am I supposed to know if people don't fill it out what their ethnicity is? And this person said, most of the times you can tell by looking at the name. And this was a black guy who said that, and I think the co-presenter was not white. But I thought that was just a very, in a presentation about equity, diversity, to come up with a stereotype.
Right. Yeah, I don't think that is appropriate, because looking at somebody's name really doesn't tell you who they are. It doesn't tell you where they were born, what cultural values, because your cultural values are established as much by your family as they are by the wider community in which you've grown up, right? And so how you identify from a cultural standpoint is about much more than the name you were given at birth, much more than that. And so I would never recommend that. I would say take your 8%, maybe resurvey, maybe just let your members know that you're being asked for data on how equitable the organization is or whatever, and if they would please fill out the survey, drop down check menu, one question. I think that many people would probably be willing to let you know how they identify. So, but if you're sending that survey, I would get all the other identities checked off while you're at it. So then you can do breakdown by gender, you can do a breakdown by years of teaching, all the rest of it, because it all makes a difference for AMTA, I would imagine.
Is that, can we go in the system, Wendy, and update that, or no?
I would have to check. I would have to check to make sure, because gender, 2 choices. So I will make a note and see if we can update gender and color, and maybe some other things that we would like to know. The type of
Okay,
scope
so
may also be interesting. So
yeah, just be careful, because out there in the academic community, when I put my dissertation survey out there. I got a lot of feedback from people who pointed out to me that gender is not the same as sexual orientation. So, and do we really need to know people's sexual orientation?
No,
Probably
no,
not.
no.
But we do need gender, how they identify, maybe male, female, other, and then leave an open space for them. That's what I ended up doing.
Okay.
So, yeah. But yeah, this blindness idea, or this taboo of we don't talk about it, it's more harmful than we can imagine. And we really need to step away from that. And we need to call our colleagues on it, because so many teachers that I have spoken to buy into this idea that I don't see race, I don't see this, I don't see that, I only see my kids. Well, you're not seeing the full child. You're not seeing the complete experience that kids brought to your classroom if you don't see where they're coming to you from, or what they're bringing with them once they step through that threshold. So,
Mina, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
In your research, I'm just curious, like when people don't talk about, like, is somebody, you know, Asian, or somebody, are you Black or are you Asian, or how do you identify? Is it, because I listened to this podcast about Puerto Rico and their census and how they stopped identifying their races. And that when they started the census back up, that 80% of the people on the island identified as white, because there was a negative connotation with being Black, even though clearly, like, if you go to Puerto Rico, 80% of the people are not white in Puerto Rico. And I wonder, so, like, is part of the reason why people don't want to ask, are you Black or are you whatever, is because there's negative connotations with certain races? Or is there no data on that?
I don't know why they don't, but I will tell you why people will answer there's 80. I don't know why they don't ask the question, but I can tell you why 80% will say they're white. And the 80% that say why they're white goes back to colonialism and colorism. So when you think about British, well, I'll take the British because it's what I'm most familiar with, but when the British colonized India, they had to somehow divide and conquer, because that's what Queen Victoria did, right? And so how do you divide and conquer? You divide and conquer by getting the states to pit up against each other. You divide and conquer by making groups. And so those, when they took all the Indians with them over to Africa, they took the Indians who were fairer to do the higher level jobs. The Indians became the traders, the merchants. And then the local community, the African, native Africans were left to do the more menial tasks. And so they just created a race system. They created a caste system. They created a culture system that is reliant completely on color. And white was always seen to be the beauty to which everyone should aspire. Hence, in India, you go to India, the highest cosmetic things that they sell is those bleaching creams, because everybody wants to be fair, right? So I think that sort of goes towards explaining why people would prefer to identify as white. But I don't know why they're not asking the question, why they wouldn't ask the question. I have no idea. So in terms of the stereotype, though, there's a lot of research about the deleterious effects of stereotype threats. So it's been shown over and over and over again that stereotype threat will increase anxiety, depression. It increases the cognitive load. So if you think back to the initial slides that I'd shown, I said that it shuts down cognitive function. because now you're hypervigilant. So you're looking for that threat, and that increases your cognitive load, shuts down your higher level cognitive function. It causes mind wandering. Classroom teachers, when these kids are coming in and they, or these young people are coming in and they're experiencing stereotype threat, every time they walk in the room, they feel horrible. And so it's little wonder then that they start going, oh, I don't like that class. Oh, I don't like this, up with their enjoyment of the class, and therefore the enjoyment of that subject area. And so they withdraw from the domain, because, as I also said earlier, the higher your buy into that domain, the greater the level of stereotype threat. So if I really want to be good at math and I go in and I'm a girl and somebody triggers my stereotype threat of being a female in a arena where boys are supposed to be better, then my fear will kick in all that much greater of letting all the girls down.
I have another question, because I'm trying to, so my son is 9 years old, and he just turned 9 years old. He's in 3rd grade. And this year, this is the first year where he's like, he's saying he doesn't like school. So like last year he tested gifted. He was like, the teachers raved about him. And then I just got a letter that came from the school this week that said his reading comprehension was behind. And I'm like, how can he be learning Mandarin and he's learning English, and then he was gifted last year, and now you're telling me he's not doing reading comprehension? And I just keep thinking, like, is it his teacher? Like, is there something going on? Like, he always tells me, like, you know, so-and-so tells me I take my pencil out my bag too slowly, or she told me she's not she hurt my feelings. She said, we're not going to celebrate my birthday, or she blah, blah, blah. Like, he just, it's just been really negative. But there's, what I'm asking is, can the stereotype threat be something that's not verbally expressed, where it's just you walk in and you feel it?
So stereotype threat is triggered, but it sounds to me more like what your son is experiencing might be microaggressions. So we got to, I mean, without being an observer in that room, I can't say, but the things you just described, they sound like microaggressions. Stereotype threat would be possibly triggered if your son is aware that boys are not supposed to be as good at reading and writing as girls. And so if the teacher then comes in and says something as simple as, all right, boys and girls, take out your books, we're going to read chapter 5. If your son is aware that that stereotype exists, and then he's asked to read aloud, and then that stereotype is triggered, and then he's asked to read aloud, that would trigger the threat. So already by saying boys and girls, he's become hypervigilant, right? And that hypervigilant is looking for the threat. Well, now she's called on me to read aloud to the class, and boys can't read as well as girls. Oh my God. I am now in a full-on stressed out mode. And then, of course, because I'm on full stressed out mode, my reading may be stumbling a little bit, confirming the stereotype, confirming that I'm no good at this.
Can you give an example, like the boys and girls thing? Really, I don't know. I had a big, oh, wow moment. Can you give an example of how that could be triggered with race?
So I'll give you the perfect example. It was actually a study that was done with Asian girls. So they got these girls to take a math test. One day, just neutral conditions. Nobody said anything. They walked in the door. They did the test, and that was your baseline score. The next time they came in, They were given the test and the Asian stereotype was triggered. I'm not sure what the trigger was that was used, but they were all Asian girls. The score went up because Asians are good at math. So triggering that Asian stereotype threat increased their test scores. The next time they came in, tests handed out and the gender stereotype was triggered, okay, boys and girls. The test scores dropped. It's as simple as that.
I guess my question then is, like earlier you're talking about how people don't like to discuss race or bring it up or talk about it. So how is stereotype threat triggered when it's not something that typically is discussed? Are there ways that microaggressions, for example, could, like, I guess, I don't know.
Yeah, don't get microaggressions mixed up with triggering stereotype threat. Stereotype threat can be triggered by really like inconsequential comments. So for example, if I go into school tomorrow and I say to my kids something like, I had the best Chinese food from the Singing Panda yesterday, and it was my birthday celebration. We had a wonderful evening. I've just triggered the Asian stereotype. I've just triggered, it's not triggering a stereotype as such, it's triggering that identity in the kid. So now I'm thinking of myself as being Asian. Now I'm thinking of myself as being a girl. Now I'm thinking of myself as being gay. Now I'm thinking of myself. So it's not triggering the stereotype per se, it's triggering that identity. And then the identity is linked more often than not in our domains to a threat or a stereotype. And then that stereotype can end up being a threat. Does that make sense? So really innocuous things. It's not going to be an aggression or a microaggression. No one's trying to hurt these kids. So if that's the impression I've given you, I truly do apologize. No one's trying to hurt these kids. It's just those words that come out of our mouth that we don't even think about. So really my end message to you, because I see it's 5:59, and if you want to carry on, I can talk to you about this in Wax Lyrical all day long. But my take-home message to you would be, every word that comes out of your mouth needs to be intentional. It has to be intentional. Little throwaway comments, especially before a test, can trigger that identity, that can trigger that stereotype, that can trigger that threat. A study upon study has been shown to do it. I saw that, James, you had your hand up.
Yeah, so as I was mentioning earlier, one of the things that I try to do is validate students' questions and indicate that I hear what you're saying, and I try to put it in the context of how they might interpret things. Is it possible that during these conversations where I'm trying to encourage them to participate in the classroom and I'm validating them because of their particular race or ethnicity, which I honestly don't pay attention to, that it might be impacting the other students?
I cannot say without actually hearing or seeing that interaction, because some of this stuff is so minor and minuscule, but yet to the kids it gets blown up, right? To the young people it gets blown up. So if your response to a question that has been asked because of a misunderstanding is always the same, that's a really interesting question. Let's unpack that a little bit. If you say that every time, the students will quickly start to recognize that comment of yours is linked to misunderstanding along the way, somewhere along the line. So you still are sending messages, but it's not about stereotype threat. It's a whole different set of messages that you're sending. Does that make sense?
Okay,
And does that answer your
I just
question?
want I want to make sure that it's a safe classroom. That's part of the reason for being here.
And I'm sure that it is. I would not go, I would not change that, because I think it is important to address misconceptions in your classroom. I think it's important to let the students know you care enough that you've heard them and that you want to address their questions, right? And increase the understanding. But in terms of stereotype threat, the main ideas are this. Number one, everyone has an identity. And that identity is usually linked to a stereotype. And if it's a negative stereotype, it can lead to stereotype threat. So when you trigger the identity, even if it's a throwaway sentence like, I love sushi, right? You're triggering an identity within the kids. That triggering of the identity then, if it's linked into a classroom domain, or you're just about to start a test, gets the brain going along the line of, oh, I'm Asian, or oh, I'm a girl, or I am gay. And gay people are not supposed to, or Asian people are not supposed to, or boys are not supposed to. And so once you trigger that identity, you will inadvertently, if the kid is aware of the stereotype. So along these studies, there are studies that show that if the kid is not aware of the stereotype, you can't trigger stereotype threat. They don't know that the stereotype exists, right? So that's that next study that's actually on the slide. But if you do trigger it before a test, if question number one on your test is something that asks the kids to write an affirmation about themselves, you can buffer the effect of that stereotype threat. So you could take their brain away from that threat situation to, what are your strengths? What was your favorite part of this unit? I wouldn't make it too academic either. In fact, the data, the studies that were done were really generic. Like, what do people like about you? So something that is a self-affirmation. And then when they did that, they saw that students performed better, because you're triggering the exact opposite, right? You're triggering self-confidence, you're triggering self-efficacy. And so once you start doing that, the grades get slightly better. And then what they found was that if you read their comments, so if it was like a warm-up when they walked in the door, what do people like about you? And they turn that in, and you hand it back ungraded, or you don't comment on it or whatever, it has an effect in the immediate, like they'll do better on that test. But if you read it, comment on it, send it back to them, they do even better. So that's one of the studies.
I'd like to break in for a moment. You made a comment a few minutes ago about the hey, you shared a personal experience with your students. Hey, I had this most wonderful Chinese food last night. And that there was a trigger in there. All right, my two reactions. One was, yes, our speech does need to be measured. All right, and in the realm of whatever your academic discipline is, that's one of the ways that modeling actually trains you. Okay. At what point is your speech about culture so measured that you just become bland?
Okay, don't do that.
But that's what I'm hearing is like, it's be aware,
Yeah.
be aware, be aware. We have a taxonomy of misconceptions in biology, chemistry, name your discipline. I'm almost sitting here going, should we be looking for a taxonomy of stereotypes?
No, no, we should not.
Okay.
And like me going in tomorrow when it's not a test day and saying to the kids, I had the best Chinese food, blah, blah, blah. is not going to impact the test scores. So I'm talking about stereotype, threat, and test scores. So it's on those test days when the assessment matters. Now, unless you're doing something blatantly, so saying I love Chinese food isn't going to hurt anybody's cognitive function during a regular classroom, because there is no domain that the kids feel pressure to perform under. Do you see what I'm saying? So when it's a threat, the threat is really important when they're being tested.
So that was a connection I missed. It was
Yeah.
like
And
assessment situations. Okay.
It's assessment situations, yeah. And in fact, one of these studies here actually says, when you tell the kiddos that this is a test, they go into stress mode. So they perform less well in a test situation. So one of the things that we want to try and do is, when we give our assessments, to not make it the be all and end all. So we don't want to make it the be all and end all of what they're learning. So we want them to recognize, yes, this is an assessment, but if they are really put under stress that they have to perform really well on each and every test, which a lot of our students do, that's also has a deleterious nature to it, because then the stress hormones are going to kick in. They're not going to perform optimally. So how we introduce our assessments is also kind of something we need to be careful about. But in terms of the stereotype threat, when we do give an assessment, we really need to be bland and blah, because we need to, as neutral as we can keep it, the best chance we're giving our kids of success. But also then you can even increase that a little bit better by having them write a self-affirmation, because the self-affirmations have been shown to increase test scores, but then they also have been shown to increase test scores even more if you read it and comment on it. Does that make sense? Did that answer your question? Perfect. And then this is another place where modeling really kicks butt, I think, because I do model in my classroom, and modeling is brilliant at making, so there is a difference between fun and enjoying a class and having interest that is triggered for the kids. So when the kids come in, teachers go, I want to have a fun class. Fun might increase engagement, but it doesn't necessarily increase learning, because a fun class for many kids is something that they're already good at. And so they stay within the confines of what they know, and they have great fun showing you what they know. But did it stretch the boundaries? And that's where interest comes in. So I don't want a fun class, I want an interesting class. When you can trigger the interest, which is what modeling does, because we always start with our experiments that make the kids go, wait, what now? Right, the exploding can, unexpected events. That unexpected event triggers an interest in wanting to find out more. And when kids are interested in finding out more, they will strive harder and focus more and stretch themselves outside of their norms, their comfort box, and learning will improve. So one way to create a safe space where students can increase their learning is to increase belongingness in that class by presenting students with motivational experiences that are going to get them to not enjoy the class, but be interested in what they're going to learn. So I had talked about it's not just race, it's gender, it's whether you're an athlete, and they actually have done a stereotype threat study on student athletes and those who are primed or subtly reminded of their athletic identity they attempted less questions on math, and they got the less scores than those that were not. So this idea of priming before an assessment is really kind of important for us to remember as educators, is that, yeah, on test days, keep it not too stressful, because it's not like this is the test and this is the end all and be all, but we're going to have an assessment today. Here you are. It's not even ladies and gentlemen, it's not even boys and girls, it's just welcome everyone. Assessment, here we go. Start off with the affirmation and read the affirmation. Try and keep it as stress-free of an environment as you possibly can. Because every kid belongs to some kind of group. And so if you access those groups, you're going to access that identity, you're going to possibly trigger a stereotype threat. And study after study after study shows that it does get triggered and it does inhibit cognitive function and test performance. So really, I am talking about test days. Obviously, if you are always, showing preference for one type of identity, if I'm always going, oh, I love sushi, oh, I love the singing panda, oh, I love this, oh, I love this, then students might start getting other messages about who I am and who I'm preferring in the classroom. So we do need to be intentional overall with our kids. We do need to share with them overall. We need to show them that we recognize who they are. We need to get them to recognize who they are and them to recognize what perspectives. So that goes back to what Tanea was saying earlier. The perspective you bring adds to the richness of this environment that we find ourselves in, because everybody has a different perspective. And when we listen to everybody's perspective, our understanding of the concept increases by 30, because we've got 30 different perspectives of this. And everybody brings something that is valid. So I think validation is important. I think recognizing strengths is important, but triggering those stereotypes by triggering identity can hurt us on test days. Anybody have any questions for me? I think I'm going to have to stop. We were close to the end anyway, so. Any questions?
So I don't know if this is specifically for you, Mina, or maybe more for Bill and Wendy kind of thing. So as I've gone through now a couple of these, meetings as workshop leaders, this is really sort of in preparation for being able to incorporate some meaningful discussion of diversity, equity issues in the workshops themselves. And, I feel like I know more about stereotype threat, but I'm not necessarily feeling like, hey, I should be able just to totally lead this discussion now among a bunch of other teachers, this summer. But I feel like I'm being told I need to do that kind of thing. So, are we going to kind of come up with a version of this presentation, or, I know Scott had worked on something else that workshop leaders going to be able to sort of like take with them and maybe modify to make their own when we are leading workshops and, we want to have these kind of conversations?
I would say that today's workshop will make you a better workshop leader, because all those people in your workshop are also coming in with their identities. And so if you kind of bear that in mind when you're leading your workshops, there's nothing that would stop you one day from saying, hey, we're going to have a test as a warm-up. I want all the boys to do this. Hey boys, we're going to do this. Boys and girls, we're going to do this math exercise or whatever. And then afterwards, when you're debriefing, ask the females how many of them kind of even recognized that something was going on. Do you know what I'm saying? You could literally work in some triggers to have the educators in front of you experience some of those threats.
Well, and I think so. These PDs is of course partially to grow as a person, as a teacher, and as a workshop leader. But I think it would be good for I will check in with the committee. There's an diversity, equity, inequality committee, and it's just unfortunate that Tanea had to leave because she's part of that group. Just, you know, because it may be helpful for workshop leaders if there is some kind of a presentation, or because of course you will address these different things as they come up, but to make it explicit, it would be nice to have tools. So I will make a message to that team and see if they can come up with something, because of course we have more workshop leaders than this group that we had here today. So so that would be helpful.
The best ones are here today.
I think, Mitch, that's a really good, it was a good question, and take what Wendy said and Mina and just add a little bit more to it. These sessions are not meant to make anybody an expert in the field. Right? You need to go to school and you need to put all your time and effort into really, like, you know, taking all these classes, doing the research, reading the literature and all these past studies that Mina's talking about. I think if you were able to just pull out bits and pieces of things that you could use, that you could, even if you're not an expert, that you could bring up and say, you know, there are studies that show, and you could just leave it at that, right? And then you could quickly go email Mina and be like, hey, what were those studies? But you could try some things out, like Mina said. I think also the goal of these sessions was to help leaders maybe just be a little bit more comfortable, not all knowing, because that's highly unlikely, but just a little bit more comfortable having conversations, because you know, they can be uncomfortable. Yeah. And things like, you know, I never would have guessed that saying like, oh my gosh, it was my birthday, we had Chinese, it was awesome, that would have any impact like on a kid. Why would it, right? But now I know, and it kind of makes me think, okay, on an assessment day, yeah, keep it bland, have a seat, welcome, good luck. But yeah, so just tips and tricks, little things, hopefully make you more comfortable, hopefully make you a little bit more knowledgeable. And like Mina, you know, maybe a little NPR session, a little webinar will spark your interest to do some further reading and research.
Yeah. Well, and I think some of my Dutch friends, they have this really big pet peeve. If you go to a restaurant here in the United States, hi guys, I'm not a guy, you know, small things. So those things can also come up, and it, for me, it's just, I just take it for what it is. But you know, if you start paying attention to it, it is kind of odd. You know, there's a different term. You can address a group differently. So it's awareness, and like Bill said, making you feel a little bit more comfortable. And we just use what Jamie says. That's a very good question. I will get back to you. And I think that's also good. You know, we will look into it. We will do a little bit of research. And I think that's for workshops. I think that also would be a legitimate comment.
I would add this though. My experience has been from the early days that our workshops are getting shorter. And the amount we're trying to pack in is getting increasing. So as workshop leaders, all of this may pose a problem if workshop leaders all of a sudden feel they have to start teaching all of this, because when?
Yeah.
How? So unless we start doing some AMTA, DEI workshops independently, separately for educators, that might be an option.
And that was mentioned at one of the recent board meetings.
I think it would be a really valuable thing, because right now the way that not just the nation, but that the world is going on, because we need to be able to engage our students in everything that's going on right now, right? From insurrections to out and out racist comments by people holding power to, you know, people being told what to do with, women being told what to do with their bodies. All of those things impact how the students are presenting in our classroom. And so to be able to have some tools under our belt to help our kids, at least just to be able to, if not engage them in conversation about it, help them recognize that you recognize that there are problems and worries in the world, and that you recognize they're bringing those to the classroom, and that you're here to make life better, not worse for them. Just sort of that kind of affirmation. And I'd be really happy to help you if you wanted to do a series of workshops at the AMTA level for DEI, because that obviously is my passion.
I wanted to say thank you. I've got to jump away. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you.
Thanks for coming, everybody. Mina, appreciate it. I always love listening to you speak.
Thank you.
That does come across as a microaggression, I have to tell you, Bill.
No, this is awesome. This is like.
I'll tell you why. Because people never ask me what race I am or what ethnicity I am. They always go, "Oh, where are you from?" Because a brown face should not have a British accent.
Oh, with the accent.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It doesn't fit, right? It's like an
but then the whole, so since I do know the story, so yes, Mina is from Indian heritage, but she was born in Africa, so she's
Where were you born?
Indian, African,
Where were you born?
British, American.
What country?
In Uganda.
Nice. I did not know that.
Yeah.
Nice.
No.
Well, we appreciate you taking the time to come and speak with the group. And somebody asked, and I don't know if Wendy sent it, did you see someone asked about the slides?
Yeah, I'm very happy to share my slides with you, Wendy.
So yes, so I texted you earlier, and then Carly asked the question, and so I think if so since I did bring my cord, so I will add that to the information of the recording, and then if people are interested, they can see the recording and they can see the slides.
Yeah, I'll share my
everybody who is in the session, they will get the slides, because then they can click like Carly and Tanea wanted, click on the videos, so you would be able to see them.
Yeah,
right.
and be able to have, you know, some of those studies as reference and all that.
Yes.
So yeah, that would be fantastic if we can get copies of that. For sure.
Yeah, some of those studies are great, and they really do point out how you can make things better, but also just how deleterious those threats can be once they are triggered. And this, what you just had, was my shortened version. I actually have a three-hour presentation for this prepared somewhere. So, where we talk about the studies in much more detail, but because that's where the true learning can occur, right? So yeah.
But Mitch has a much longer workshop, because you are meeting how many, 5.5 weeks?
Yeah,
so
but we're only
leading the ASU workshop.
Oh.
Yeah, but we're only meeting for like 2.5 hours face to face. So I mean, when you add up our contact hours, I don't know that we're actually that much different from some of the other ones.
I think we are aiming, AMTA is aiming for 45. the workshop that Jamie Visenka has, they are always shorter. He always has had the 2-week workshops, and people can take week 1 year and week 2 the next year.
Okay.
And but I think they want to try face-to-face, just have 6 people in the room. Well, and ASU also has the face-to-face mechanics.
Yeah, which I was kind of surprised. I mean,